Be seated. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Do you ever have a time when it felt like everything was coming apart? Like the world is ending? Over the centuries, many times people have thought the world was about to come to an end. In 410 AD, when the Visigoths sacked Rome, the world was going to end right then. Vikings came to Europe in 800 and after that, and it was the end of the world for sure. Martin Luther thought the end of the world was going to come at least a generation within a generation of his own death. And certainly it was the end of the world for folks who lived in North and South America when measles and smallpox was unwittingly brought across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe and wiped out somewhere between 50 and 90% of the population. Can you imagine that? And it was the end of the world when folks were captured and sold onto ships and then resold into slavery in these Americas. In the first part of the 19th century, 1820, 1830, people looked at the Bible and said, oh, we can figure out when the end comes. It's the next dispensation after 1,000 years. And the millennialists and the dispensationalists came along and they said, the end of the world's going to come. And then it didn't. So they postponed it. In fact, I think it was last summer, some guy in South Africa said that he'd got a vision and the rapture was going to come in September. So everybody got together and get prepared for the rapture to come in September, and it didn't come. Or at least it passed all of us up, maybe. I don't know. He said, I miscalculated. Sorry, it was in October. Here we still are, for better or for worse. Jesus says, the world's a crazy place. It's not the end of the world. Now, for us personally, there are times when it feels like our world is ending. When our hearts break over torn relationships in our family. When we feel like our backs are against the wall financially and there's no way we can come out from under the burden of debt that we have. Or we don't even know how we're going to pay the bills next week or next month. Our minds are bound and enslaved to addictions, or else weighed down by mental conditions of depression, or our eyes are skewed by mental conditions that twist our understanding of reality. Our bodies are rebelling against us, and we hurt like we didn't used to hurt, or we can't move around like we used to move around, and we wish we could move around. Feels like the world is coming to an end. Jesus says, the world's not coming to an end. And even if it did, the love of God would carry you through. So I want to back up from the gospel lesson for today for a moment to look at what you usually need to do whenever you look at any Bible passage. You need to look at what comes before and what comes after. Now, what comes after, Jesus talks about the fall of Jerusalem, which is more world-ending stuff. But before this, Jesus has been engaging in what one might call a series of question-asking contests. Okay, and this was common in the ancient world. You would be in a public place, everybody would be watching, and and someone would ask you a question. Now, the question, like we talked about last week with the Sadducees, the question is not designed to increase anybody's understanding or for anybody to learn anything. Those kinds of questions are really good, and we should ask more of those kinds of questions of one another. But this kind of question in the question contest is a question designed to trip you up. So if somebody asks you a question and you answer well, then your status in the community is increased. And the questioner's status is decreased. You've taken away some of their status. But if you answer awkwardly or in a way that doesn't make sense, then your status decreases and the questioner's status increases, right? We saw this happen last week with the Sadducees. Jesus has engaged in question contests with all of the pretty and the powerful, the magnificent and the moneyed in his society. Yes, the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. And Jesus, guess what? Spoiler alert, he wins the question contest. Jesus is the winner. Hooray for Jesus. And then he criticizes the pretty and the powerful and the magnificent and the moneyed in his society. And he sits down opposite the treasury box in the temple sanctuary. So like the room like we have here, well, in the Jerusalem temple, there was a box up front, and you would put your contributions to the temple into the box. He sits down opposite the box, and he's watching people come forward, and they are putting large amounts of money into the treasury box, it's like the offering plate. Kaplunk, 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 go the silver and the gold coins into the treasury box. Yes. Now, many of you have heard this story already before, so before I go on, I need to take a little bit of an aside. Here we go. And make sure it is clear to everyone that it is not a bad thing to put a lot of money into the offering plate. Thank you very much. In fact, if you wanted to put a lot of money into the offering plate today, then that would be a wonderful thing. But God cares about the attitude with which we give. That's what God cares about. Whether we give a lot or a little, whether we have a lot or a little, God cares about the spirit with which we give money or time or ability or whatever, depending on how much time or ability or money we have. It's the spirit that God looks at. Okay, so everybody's putting their large amounts of money into the treasury box. Kaplunk, kaplunk goes the gold and the silver, and here comes a poor widow. And she comes up to the treasury box, and all she's got is these two little bitty pennies. Now, we don't do pennies anymore, I guess. They aren't worth enough for us to do pennies, but she's got two little pennies. And she puts these two little bitty pennies into the treasury box. Kapleek, kapleek. And Jesus says, that poor widow gave more than anybody else because everybody else gave out of their abundance, okay? What they had left over. But she gave from out of her very livelihood, everything she had, her bios in Greek, her life. What is it like when we give our lives to Jesus? Now, this woman, I need to let you know about this woman. She is giving her very best. She is determined. She is focused. She insists on her allegiance to this God who brings people out of bondage, out of slavery, into freedom, and not just freedom of what we can do, of doing whatever we want to do. That's slavery to yourself. No, freedom of being in community, in respect and peace, and living together in honor and love for one another. That's freedom. And this God brings us, all of us, out of slavery into freedom. She is focused and dedicated to this God that looks with favor upon the lowly and the poor, the infant, the orphan, and the foreigner. She is focused on this God who is full of gracious and mercy and is full of loving kindness, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. This is the God she is focused on. Even though she lives in a society which is supposed to show what this God is like and has failed, her particularly. And she is in the midst of an institution that has failed to show what this God is like as well. And she still is determined to serve this dream this hope, this God who loves her. Okay? And Jesus says, there's the gold. There's the wealth. No matter how much money you have, a lot or a little, there's the wealth. There's the glory. There's the power. What Jesus says. And now, immediately after that story, immediately after that occurrence, that event, now we have the gospel lesson for today. And people are looking around, and they are so impressed. Oh, beautiful stones, what wonderful ornaments there are. Now Luke is a little easier on the disciples, okay? In Luke, which we read today, everybody around is seeing this. In Matthew and Mark, it's the disciples who are going, ooh, wow, so great, so grand, what beautiful stones. And these stones were like 60 feet long and 12 feet by 12 feet by 60 feet. They were huge stones. They were very impressive, some of them white marble. There were these ornaments, beautiful gold and silver and tapestries of azure that were come from Babylon and so on and so forth. Everybody's very impressed, very swept away by it all. This immediately after Jesus has pointed out what real glory is and what real gold is. Moreover, everybody knew where the temple came from. Everybody knew who had ordered the building of the temple with all of its beautiful things. You know? It was Herod who had the temple built. Herod, who called himself Herod the Great. I put it in quotation marks. Herod the Great. That's what he called himself. This is the Herod from the Christmas stories, which, if you recall, the Magi, the three wise men, come to Jerusalem. They're looking for the Christ child, the new king of the Jews. And they ask around, where's the king of the Jews? And nobody knows. But Herod hears about it, and he's terrified. And the whole town is terrified because, you know what? There can only be one king. One king. Me. Right? So Herod tries to get the Magi to tell him where the Christ child is. And he says, I wish to come and worship him myself. It's a lie. It's a lie. The verses after that show that what Herod really wants to do is to destroy the Christ child because he presents a threat to his power. So Herod lies to the Magi. They go, they bring their gifts to the Christ child. An angel tells them to go home by a different road. Herod is now furious. His plan has been foiled. So he sends out his henchmen and has every child in Bethlehem, aged 2 years old and younger, killed. Herod the Great. Herod the liar. Herod the tyrant. Herod was the one who built the temple to make himself look pretty. What great stone. What beautiful ornament. So Jesus says, you see all this? Not one stone be left upon another. All of it be thrown down. See? Wealth and power and influence are gifts of God that we use as tools in order to serve God's people and celebrate life. That's what they're for. And as such, they are beautiful and good. When they become ends in themselves, when power is used to keep power, when wealth only exists to make more wealth, then they are smoke in dust, emptier than space. Jesus says, there will be wars and insurrections, plagues and famines. We live in a crazy world. He says, you will be persecuted You will be hauled in front of judges and rulers and magistrates because you stood up. You stood up for me and for what I believe in, which is the love of God for all people and for you. For you. No exceptions. No prerequisites. No qualifications. I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do about this at all. God loves you right now. And God will not leave you alone. God will pull us on a journey. You will be called in front of judges and magistrates because of my name, because of this God who is merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. You will be called before it when you stand up for me. You will be called to task by your friends and relatives who are supposed to love you when you stand up for the people I care about, which is everyone, but particularly folks who are on the edges of society who aren't supposed to belong. Some of you will be killed. But not one hair on your head will be destroyed. Not one hair on your head will be lost. The Greek means lost or destroyed, which is to say that the love of God, which upholds us in this life and carries us through the chaos, is deeper than the end of the world, deeper than any ending, and deeper than death itself. That love will carry us through. So the love of God comes to us, embraces us, and if we let it, then it comes out and emerges from us in love for ourselves and our neighbors and back to God again. That's how it works. And that's what carries us through. Okay? So one brief final story that might illustrate just a little bit. There's a book that was written in 1939 by Antoine Saint-Exupéry. I don't do French well. I should get Deneen to do the French. It's called Wind, Sand, and Stars. And in that book, Saint-Exupéry tells about one of the greatest aviators of the time, which is Marcel Guillaume. And he flew mail across the Andes Mountains in the 1920s. Remember the planes in the 1920s? Brrr. Andes Mountains, 1920s. In his 90-second flight across the Andes carrying the mail, a freak storm crashed his plane. And he was trapped in the mountains. And it was winter, June 1930. It was winter in that part of the world. And so he had to walk out of the Andes Mountains in the winter through 3 mountain passes. It took him a week. And it was extremely painful because it was cold. This was not some nice little camping expedition. There was no tent. There was no furry, fuzzy sleeping bag to sleep in. It was him alone, and he walked all the way out and was saved by a young teenage boy. He finally reached habitation. They asked him, "What kept you going when you were exhausted, freezing, and about to die, and there was no hope, and you still put one foot in front of the other? What kept you going?" And he said, "I wanted to see my wife, Noelle. Wanted to see her again." Love is what makes us capable of enduring. And we may not be able to stir up the love within ourselves, but the love of God always surrounds us, always fills us. This is what will keep us safe and strong when the world comes apart. Thanks be to God.